Marcus Chen
Sir,
wiped the
we
sweat
have
from his
contact.
forehead with the back of his grimy work glove, leaving a streak of engine oil across his skin. The maintenance bay of the Valorian dreadnought Crimson Talon hummed with the low thrum of massive engines,
Right.
a sound that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat over the past 6 months.
Tactical analysis.
As one of only 12
Sir,
humans permitted
massive
aboard
gravitational
alien
distortions,
vessels
no
as part
drive
of the Terran
signatures.
Valorian
It's as if the
exchange
ship isn't
program,
there.
Marcus knew how fortunate he was to be here.
All stop!
Even if his job mainly
Drop us
involved
back to
crawling
normal
through ventilation
space
systems that were
immediately!
too small for the towering Valorians. The Valoronians were magnificent beings, standing nearly 9 feet tall with sleek obsidian black skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their elongated skulls housed 4 piercing silver eyes, and their movements carried a fluid grace that spoke of countless generations of warrior breeding. Their society was built on concepts of honor, combat prowess, and rigid hierarchy that humans barely understood. What humans did understand was that the Valorians were the dominant military force in this sector of the galaxy, and their protection was the only thing keeping Earth from being obliterated by any number of hostile alien species. Marcus squeezed through a particularly narrow maintenance tunnel, his magnetic tools clanking against the metal walls as he maneuvered toward a malfunctioning atmospheric processor. The human body's smaller stature and flexibility made him invaluable for repairs in spaces that would require complete dismantling for a Valorian engineer to access. He took pride in his work, knowing that every successful repair earned humanity a little more respect in the eyes of their alien protectors. As he emerged from the tunnel into a larger maintenance chamber, Marcus nearly collided with a figure in gleaming ceremonial armor. He scrambled backward, but his tool belt caught on a protruding pipe, sending him stumbling forward. His outstretched hand, still wearing the oil-stained work glove, made contact with the intricate chest plate of the armored figure. Time seemed to freeze. The armor was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen, even aboard this ship, filled with Valorian military regalia. It was crafted from what appeared to be a deep purple metal that shifted colors as light played across its surface, with intricate engravings that seemed to move and flow like living script. Silver accents traced patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they contained some form of energy that human eyes weren't meant to process. But it wasn't the armor that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. It was the sudden, complete stillness of the figure wearing it. The Valorian beneath the armor had gone rigid, and Marcus could feel the intensity of 4 silver eyes boring into him through the helmet's visor. "Oh gods, I'm so sorry," Marcus stammered, jerking his hand back as if the armor had burned him. "I didn't mean to. I was just trying to get to the atmospheric processor and my belt caught," and the armored figure raised one gauntleted hand, and Marcus's words died in his throat. Slowly, deliberately, the Valorian reached up and removed her helmet, revealing features that made Marcus's breath catch. Where most Valorian faces were angular and sharp, hers held an almost ethereal quality. Her 4 silver eyes were larger than typical for her species, and her obsidian skin bore intricate tattoos that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. "Human," she said, and her voice was like the whisper of wind through cosmic void, carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's very bones. "Do you know what that means?" Marcus shook his head, genuinely confused and terrified that he had committed some grave offense that would get him ejected from the ship or worse. "No, ma'am. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I was just trying to do my job and I accidentally touched your armor. I didn't mean any disrespect." The Valorian's 4 eyes studied him with an intensity that made Marcus feel like a specimen under a microscope. Around them, the maintenance bay had grown unnaturally quiet, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. Marcus became aware that other Valorians had appeared at the entrances to the chamber, their faces bearing expressions of shock and something that looked almost like fear. "Your name, human," the armored figure commanded, though her tone held no hostility. "Marcus Chen, ma'am. Maintenance technician 3rd class, assigned to atmospheric and environmental systems." "Marcus Chen," she repeated, as if testing the shape of the foreign syllables. "I am Cathera, First Blade of the Crimson Talon, bearer of the Eternal Watch, and," she paused, her silver eyes never leaving his face, "as of this moment your life has become far more complicated than you can possibly imagine." The gathered Valorians began speaking among themselves in rapid, hushed tones, their native language a series of harmonious sounds that Marcus had never been able to properly understand, despite months of exposure. He caught familiar words here and there, Cathis, which meant sacred, Veltar, which meant binding, and Threatherattle, a word he had heard only once before, whispered by a Valorian engineer who had immediately gone pale and refused to explain its meaning. Cathera raised her hand again, and the chamber fell silent. "Leave us," she commanded the others. There was a moment of hesitation, then the sound of armored feet retreating until Marcus and Cathara were alone. "Ma'am," Marcus began, "if I violated some protocol or cultural taboo, I sincerely apologize. I've read all the cultural briefings, but I know there are aspects of Valorian society that humans aren't privy to. If there's a way to make amends, there is no making amends for what has occurred, Marcus Chen, Cathara said, and Marcus felt his heart sink. But then she continued, because what has occurred cannot be undone, cannot be forgotten, and cannot be ignored. You have triggered something that has not happened in over 3,000 cycles. She began to pace, her armored boots making no sound on the metal deck despite their obvious weight. Tell me, human, what do you know of our armor? Not the basic protective gear worn by our soldiers, but the ceremonial armor of the First Blades. Marcus thought carefully before answering. I know that each piece is individually crafted, that the metals are sourced from the core worlds of the Valerian Empire, and that the engravings tell the story of the warrior's achievements. I know that to touch another warrior's armor without permission is considered a grave insult, which is why I'm so sorry for— You speak of common armor, Cathara interrupted. This, she gestured to her chest plate, where Marcus's handprint was still visible as a faint discoloration in the metal, is not common armor. This is Thrinatal Mar, the bonding plate, worn only by the First Blades of the Empire. It has not been touched by ungloved flesh in 3 millennia, because to touch it is to initiate the most sacred of our ancient protocols. The color drained from Marcus's face. What kind of protocol? Cathara stopped pacing and faced him directly. The Cathash Veltar, the sacred binding. In the old times, when our people first reached for the stars, the First Blades were chosen not only for their combat prowess, but for their ability to forge alliances with other species. The bonding plate was created to identify those who could be trusted absolutely, those who could stand as equal partners with our greatest warriors. I don't understand, Marcus said, though a cold dread was beginning to form in his stomach. The armor reads the essence of those who touch it, Cathara explained. It measures their intentions, their character, their potential for honor and loyalty. For 3,000 years, no being has touched the bonding plate and been found worthy. Many have tried, diplomats, nobles, even other Valorians, and all have been rejected. The armor would burn their flesh or simply refuse to acknowledge their touch. Marcus looked down at his hands, still covered in the same grimy work gloves he had been wearing when he touched her armor. But I'm just a maintenance worker. I'm not a diplomat or a noble or anything special. I was just trying to fix an atmospheric processor. And yet, Cathara said, moving closer to him, the armor has accepted you. Your handprint glows with the mark of worthiness. By the laws of our ancestors, by the protocols that govern the First Blades, you have been chosen as my Veltar Thes, my bond brother. The implications of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. But I'm human. I'm not even a citizen of your empire. I'm here on a temporary exchange program. There has to be some mistake. Cathara's expression softened slightly, and for the first time since this surreal encounter began, Marcus glimpsed something almost like sympathy in her alien features. I thought the same thing, human. For the past several minutes I've been hoping that this was some malfunction of the armor, some cosmic jest, but the bonding plate does not make mistakes. It has chosen you, and by choosing you, it has bound our fates together in ways that will reverberate through both our peoples. What does that mean exactly? What happens now? Now, Cathara said, we must report this to the ship's council. They will need to contact the High Command, who will need to consult the ancient texts and the Council of Elders. There will be investigations, ceremonies, and tests. Your human government will need to be notified, because you can no longer be considered merely a maintenance worker on an exchange program. Marcus sat down heavily on a nearby equipment crate, his mind reeling. This is insane. 6 hours ago, my biggest worry was whether I could fix a faulty air recycler before my shift ended. Now you're telling me that I've been selected by an alien artifact to be some kind of cosmic partner to one of the most elite warriors in the galaxy? The universe has a sense of irony, Marcus Chen, Cathara said, and there was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. But the bond is not something to be taken lightly. If the ancient protocols are followed, and they must be, you will need to prove yourself worthy of this honor through trials that have broken the spirits of beings far more prepared than you.
And if I fail these trials?
Cathara's expression grew grave. Failure would bring dishonor not only to yourself, but to me and to the entire institution of the First Blades. It would suggest that the armor has become corrupted, that the ancient ways are no longer valid. The consequences would extend far beyond our individual fates. Marcus stood up, feeling the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders. Then I guess failure isn't an option? No, Cathara agreed. It is not. As if summoned by their words, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the maintenance bay. A group of high-ranking Valorian officers entered the chamber, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. At their head walked a figure whose armor bore the insignia of a ship's commander, First Blade Cathara, the commander said formally. We have received reports of unusual energy readings from this section. Sensors indicate that a bonding protocol has been activated. Cathara straightened to attention. Your reports are accurate, Commander Velnash. The human Marcus Chen has triggered the Katesh Veltar. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the distant hum of the ship's engines through the thick walls. Commander Velnash looked from Cathara to Marcus and back again, his 4 silver eyes wide with what Marcus was learning to recognize as the Valorian equivalent of shock. This is unprecedented, Velnash said finally. The implications are staggering. We must immediately contact High Command and request guidance. In the meantime, both of you are to remain aboard ship under protective custody until we receive instructions. Understood, Commander, Cathara replied. And you, human? Velnash turned his attention to Marcus. You will be assigned quarters befitting your new status. Guards will be posted not for your imprisonment, but for your protection. If what has occurred here becomes known throughout the ship before proper protocols can be established, it could cause significant disruption. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. As the group prepared to leave the maintenance bay, Cathara fell into step beside Marcus. There is something else you should know, she said quietly. The bond that has formed between us, it is not merely ceremonial. We will begin to develop a connection that goes beyond normal understanding. Your thoughts and emotions will become clearer to me, and mine to you. We will need to learn to guard our minds carefully until we understand the full extent of what has happened. Great, Marcus muttered. An accidental psychic link with an alien warrior. This day just keeps getting better. Despite the gravity of the situation, Cathara's mouth curved in what Marcus thought might be the Valorian equivalent of a smile. Your sense of humor may serve you well in the trials to come, Marcus Chen. He will need every advantage you can find. As they walked through the corridors of the great ship, Marcus caught sight of other crew members stopping to stare at the unprecedented sight of a human walking alongside a First Blade as an apparent equal. Word would spread quickly, he knew, and with it would come questions that no one yet knew how to answer. The comfortable routine of his life as a maintenance worker was over. Whatever came next would test not only his abilities, but the very foundations of human-Valorian relations. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Marcus could swear he felt an alien presence, warm and watchful, that he instinctively knew belonged to the warrior walking beside him. The bond had begun. Marcus had never imagined that luxury could feel like a prison, but the quarters assigned to him were more spacious than his entire apartment back on Earth. The walls were made of the same deep purple metal as Cathara's armor, with silver inlays that seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm. A massive viewport showed the starfield outside, where distant suns wheeled slowly as the Crimson Talon maintained its patrol route along the outer edges of Valorian space. He had been alone for 6 hours now, with only his racing thoughts for company. The Valorian guards outside his door were silent as statues, and the meal they had brought him consisted of nutrition blocks that tasted like cardboard mixed with synthetic vitamins. Every time he tried to process what had happened, his mind shied away from the enormity of it like a hand pulling back from a flame. The soft chime of the doorcom system interrupted his brooding. "Enter!" he called, expecting another silent guard with another meal. Instead, Cathara stepped through the doorway, and Marcus immediately noticed the changes in her appearance. Gone was the ceremonial armor, replaced by simple dark robes that somehow made her seem even more imposing than before. The tattoos on her obsidian skin were more visible now, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow as she moved. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. All 4 of them were focused on him with an intensity that made him feel exposed, as if she could see straight through to his soul. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "The ship's council has been in session for the past 4 hours, and High Command has responded to our initial report. The situation is more complex than either of us anticipated." Marcus gestured to one of the cushioned seating areas, designed for Valorian physiology, but still comfortable enough for humans. "More complex how? I thought we covered the basics pretty thoroughly." Ancient armor, sacred bonding, unprecedented situation. My life gets complicated. What else is there? Cathara seated herself across from him, her movements carrying that fluid grace that all Valorians possess but which seemed even more pronounced in her. "The Council has consulted the historical records, Marcus. The last time a Kathesh Veltar was successfully initiated was 34-7 cycles ago, during the war with the Shikari Collective. The human who was bonded to the first blade of that era became instrumental in forging the alliance that ended the conflict. Okay, Marcus said slowly, so there's precedent for this working out well. That's good news, right? It would be if that were the end of the story, Cathara replied. But the records also show what happened to that human afterward. The bond strengthened over time, granting him abilities far beyond normal human capabilities. Enhanced strength, extended lifespan, and, most importantly, the ability to understand and communicate with any sentient species through what your people might call telepathic empathy. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. That doesn't sound terrible, actually. Enhanced abilities, longer life, universal translation. What's the catch? Cathara's expression grew troubled. The catch is that such changes come with a price. The human bonded with my predecessor became something beyond either human or Valorian. He could no longer relate to his own species in the same way, and while he was respected among the Valorians, he was never truly one of us either. He spent the last centuries of his life as a bridge between worlds, but never belonging fully to any. The implications of her words settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. So I'm looking at becoming some kind of cosmic translator, but at the cost of my humanity. Potentially, Cathara confirmed. But that was one case 3 millennia ago. The circumstances were different, the need was different, and most importantly, the human underwent the full bonding ritual by choice, knowing the consequences. In our case, the bond was initiated accidentally, and we do not yet know if the same transformations will occur. Marcus leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. Wonderful. So I might become a superhuman diplomat, or I might just die horribly during whatever trials are coming up. Any other cheerful possibilities I should know about? Actually, yes, Cathara said, and there was something in her tone that made Marcus look at her more carefully. High Command has decided that both our fates are too important to be left to chance. They are sending the Eternal Harmony, a dreadnought 3 times the size of this ship, to retrieve us. Aboard that vessel is Elder Morthak, the oldest living Valorine, and one of the few who was alive during the last successful bonding. That sounds like good news. Someone with experience who can guide us through this. Cathara's 4 eyes fixed on him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Elder Morthak was the first blade who underwent the original bonding 3,000 years ago. He is also the one who decreed that the practice should be discontinued after witnessing what it cost his human partner. He is coming to determine whether our bond should be allowed to proceed or whether it should be severed before it develops further. Severed? Marcus asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. The process would almost certainly be fatal to you, Cathara said quietly, and would leave permanent damage to my own psyche. But if Elder Morthak determines that the risk of allowing the bond to develop is too great, he has the authority to order the severance regardless of the cost. Marcus stood up abruptly and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars. So let me see if I understand this correctly. I accidentally touched some ancient alien armor, which apparently makes me cosmically important. Now I'm going to be judged by someone who has a personal reason to disapprove of the whole process, and if he decides I'm not worthy, both of us die. Did I miss anything? You missed the most important part, Cathara said, rising and moving to stand beside him. The bond is not something that happens to us. It is something that we must choose to embrace and develop together. Even if Elder Morthak approves the continuation of the process, we will need to work in harmony to navigate the changes that are coming. As if to emphasize her point, Marcus felt a sudden warmth in the back of his mind, accompanied by emotions that he instinctively knew were not his own. There was determination there, and concern, and something that felt almost like protective affection. He turned to look at Cathara and saw her silver eyes widen slightly. You felt that, she said, and it wasn't a question. Yes, and you felt me feeling it, didn't you? The connection is developing faster than the historical records indicated it should, Cathara said. This could be seen as evidence that the bond is particularly strong, or it could be interpreted as a sign that the process is unstable. Marcus found himself studying her face, noting details he hadn't observed before. The tattoos weren't just decorative, they seemed to be some kind of living chronicle with new patterns appearing as he watched. Her 4 eyes weren't just larger than typical for her species. They held depths that spoke of experiences far beyond her apparent age. How old are you? He asked suddenly. By your reckoning, approximately 150 years, Cathara replied. Young for a first blade, which was one of the controversies surrounding my appointment to this position. Many of the council believed that someone with more experience should have been chosen for such an important role. And now you're bonded to a 28-year-old human maintenance worker who doesn't even know how to hold a sword, Marcus said with bitter humor. They're probably feeling pretty vindicated right about now. Perhaps, Cathara said. Or perhaps the universe has wisdom that surpasses the understanding of the Council. The fact remains that the armor chose you, Marcus Chen, not a human diplomat or military officer or scholar. It chose someone whose first instinct upon seeing distress is to help, whose reaction to insult is to apologize, and whose response to impossible circumstances is to make jokes.
You make that sound like a good thing.
The qualities that the bonding plate recognizes are not those that can be taught or acquired through training. They are fundamental aspects of character. The armor saw something in you that it has not recognized in 3 millennia of testing. Before Marcus could respond, the door chimed again. This time it was Commander Valnash, accompanied by an aide whose armor bore the markings of the Communications Division. First Blade Cathara, Human Marcus Chen, the commander said formally. The Eternal Harmony will arrive within 6 hours. Elder Morthak has transmitted preliminary instructions for your preparation. You are both to undergo the cleansing ritual and meditation to prepare your minds for examination. Understood, Commander, Cathara replied. What of the crew? How much of this situation has become common knowledge? Word has spread throughout the ship, as was inevitable, Valnash admitted. The reaction has been mixed. Some see this as a sign that the old ways retain their power and significance. Others view it as evidence that our sacred traditions have been compromised by alien contamination. Marcus felt his face flush with anger. Contamination? I'm right here, you know. Commander Valnash turned his four-eyed gaze on Marcus, and to his surprise, the alien's expression held what looked like respect. Your reaction speaks well of you, human. A being of lesser character would have remained silent, or sought to appease those who question your worthiness. The fact that you defend your own dignity, even in the face of overwhelming power, suggests that the armor's choice may have been wiser than many believe. Thank you, I think, Marcus said. The cleansing ritual will take place in the ship's temple, the commander continued. It involves meditation, purification of the body, and preparation of the mind for psychic examination. I must warn you that the process can be intense for those not accustomed to Valorian spiritual practices. Define intense, Marcus said. You will experience visions drawn from your memories and your deepest fears, Cathara explained. The purpose is to strip away all pretense and reveal your true character to Elder Morthak's examination. There is no way to prepare for it except to accept that your most private thoughts and experiences will be laid bare. Fantastic, Marcus muttered, as if this situation wasn't humiliating enough already. After the commander left, Cathara remained, seeming reluctant to return to her own quarters. There is something else you should know before the ritual, she said finally. The cleansing does not only reveal your thoughts to the examiner. Because of the bond between us, I will also experience your memories and emotions. And you will experience mine. Marcus stared at her. So this psychic connection thing goes both ways? Completely both ways. You will see my childhood on the warrior colonies of Valthresh Prime, my training in the combat academies, my first battles, and my doubts about my own worthiness for the position of First Blade. You will feel my pride, my fears, and my shame. And I'll experience your reaction to finding out that you're bonded to a human janitor, Marcus said with forced lightness. Cathara moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell the alien scent of her skin, something like ozone and copper and starlight. You are not a janitor, Marcus Chen. You are someone who takes pride in honest work, who finds satisfaction in making things function better than they did before, and who sees value in tasks that others consider beneath their dignity. These are not flaws to be ashamed of. The warmth in the back of Marcus's mind intensified, and this time he could identify it clearly as coming from Cathara. It was acceptance, admiration, and something deeper that he didn't dare name. The ritual will be difficult for both of us, she continued, but it will also create a foundation of understanding between us that normally takes years to develop. When Elder Morthak examines our bond, he will see not just what we are individually, but what we might become together. And what might we become? Marcus asked. Cathara's four eyes met his too, and in that moment Marcus felt the full weight of the connection between them. It was like touching a live wire made of starlight, overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Something that has never existed before, she said simply. Something that might change the galaxy. As she left to prepare for the ritual, Marcus remained by the viewport, watching the stars wheel slowly past. In just a few hours, he would undergo a ceremony that would strip his mind bare before an alien elder who might decide his fate. The safe, predictable life he had known was gone forever, replaced by possibilities that stretched beyond his ability to comprehend. But as he stood there, feeling the growing warmth of the bond in his mind and the echo of Cathara's unshakable confidence in him, Marcus found himself looking forward to the trial ahead. For the first time in his life, he was part of something larger than himself, something that mattered on a scale beyond his wildest dreams. The universe had chosen him for reasons he didn't understand. Soon, he would find out if he was worthy of that choice. The temple aboard the Crimson Talon was unlike any sacred space Marcus had ever seen. The chamber was spherical, with walls that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal that pulsed with soft, rhythmic light. Geometric patterns covered every surface, flowing and shifting in designs that hurt to look at directly but somehow conveyed profound meaning at the edge of perception. The air itself felt different here, charged with an energy that made the hair on Marcus's arm stand on end. Cathara knelt at the center of the chamber, no longer wearing her simple robes but instead clothed in a garment that seemed to be woven from liquid starlight. The tattoos on her exposed skin blazed with their own internal fire, creating patterns that Marcus now realized were not mere decoration, but some form of living script that chronicled her achievements and spiritual development. "Approach the center circle, Marcus Chen," commanded Elder Morthak, and Marcus felt his blood chill at the sound of that ancient voice. The Elder had arrived aboard the Eternal Harmony just 2 hours ago, and Marcus's first glimpse of him had been profoundly unsettling. Where other Valorians stood 9 feet tall, Elder Morthak towered at nearly 12 feet, his frame elongated and ethereal in a way that spoke of centuries of life among the stars. His skin was not the typical obsidian black of his people, but a deep midnight blue that seemed to contain flecks of actual starlight. His 4 eyes had become completely silver with age, lacking pupils but somehow seeing everything with perfect clarity. Most disturbing of all were the modifications he had undergone. His left arm had been replaced with a construct of the same purple metal as the bonding plates, covered in inscriptions that moved and shifted of their own accord. Similar metallic tracery covered portions of his skull and torso, visible through the translucent ceremonial robes he wore. He was living proof of what the full bonding process could do to a being over the course of millennia. "You hesitate?" Elder Morthak observed, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated directly in Marcus's bones. "Fear is natural, but it must not be allowed to corrupt the ritual. Step into the circle." Marcus forced his legs to move, stepping onto the raised dais at the chamber's center. Immediately, the crystal walls began to pulse more rapidly, and the energy in the air intensified until it felt like standing in the middle of a lightning storm. Cathara was only a few feet away, but the space between them seemed to stretch like a vast chasm. "The cleansing ritual has not been performed in over 2,000 cycles," Elder Morthak said as he began to pace around the central platform. "It is designed to strip away all pretense, all lies we tell ourselves about our true nature. You will experience your memories as if living them for the first time, but with the wisdom and perspective you possess now. You will face your failures, your shames, and your deepest fears without the comfortable distance of time." "What happens if I can't handle it?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Then you will break," the elder replied with casual indifference. "Your mind will shatter, and the bond will consume what remains of your consciousness. Cathara will be driven insane by the backlash, and both your peoples will suffer for the failure of this experiment." "No pressure," Marcus muttered. Elder Morthak stopped directly in front of him, those ancient silver eyes boring into his soul. "I have lived for over 3 millennia, human. I have seen empires rise and fall, watched species transcend their physical limitations or destroy themselves in the attempt. I have personally ended the lives of 17 beings who attempted to force a bond and were found wanting. Do not mistake my warning for an attempt to intimidate you. I am simply ensuring that you understand the stakes." Marcus felt Cathara's presence in his mind, a warm current of support and determination that helped steady his nerves. Through the growing connection, he could sense her own apprehension, but also her absolute faith in his ability to survive what was coming. "I understand," Marcus said firmly. "Let's get this over with." Elder Morthak's expression might have been approval, though it was hard to tell on his alien features. "Very well. Cathara, initiate the resonance." Cathara placed her hands on 2 of the crystalline protrusions that emerged from the platform, and immediately the entire chamber filled with a sound like singing crystal. The walls began to glow more brightly, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift in the space around them. "Marcus Chen," Elder Morthak commanded, "place your hands on the remaining resonance points and open your mind to the ritual. Marcus reached out and grasped the crystal formations, which were warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with a heartbeat that matched his own. The moment his skin made contact, the world exploded into light and sensation. He was 7 years old again, standing in the ruins of the apartment building where his family had lived before the Valorian contact changed everything. The economic collapse that followed first contact had left millions unemployed, and his parents had been among the casualties. He felt again the crushing weight of abandonment, the terror of being alone in a world that suddenly seemed vast and hostile. But now, with adult understanding, he could see what had been invisible to his child's perception. His parents hadn't abandoned him by choice. They had died trying to reach him during the riots that swept through the refugee camps, killed by other humans who blamed aliens for their suffering. The social workers who placed him in the orbital orphanage hadn't been cruel bureaucrats, but overworked people trying to save as many children as they could from an impossible situation. The scene shifted, and he was 14, being selected for the technical training program that would eventually lead to his placement aboard alien vessels. He relived the shame he had felt at being chosen for menial work while his more academically gifted peers went on to universities and careers in xenodiplomacy. But through the lens of experience, he could see the truth that had been hidden from his younger self. This selection had been incredibly competitive, chosen from thousands of candidates not just for technical skill but for emotional stability and adaptability. Memory after memory flowed past, each one re-examined and recontextualized. His first day aboard a Valorian ship, when he had been so nervous he vomited in his quarters and spent the next hour convinced he would be sent home in disgrace. His growing pride as he proved himself capable of repairs that others couldn't perform. The gradual realization that his work wasn't menial but essential, that the Valorians had learned to respect his contributions even if they rarely expressed it in ways humans could easily recognize. Through it all, he felt Cathara's presence in his mind, experiencing his memories alongside him. But rather than judgment, he sensed wonder and growing respect. She was seeing his life through human eyes, understanding for the first time the casual cruelties and small kindnesses that had shaped him, the way his species struggled to find meaning in lives that seemed insignificant against the vast scale of galactic civilization. Then the flow reversed, and Marcus found himself experiencing Cathara's memories. He was a child on the warrior world of Valthrash Prime, training with weapons almost as tall as he was, learning that strength and honor were the only values that mattered. He felt the fierce pride of Valorian culture, but also its crushing weight on those who didn't naturally excel in combat. Through Cathara's eyes, he experienced her early struggles, how her smaller size and preference for strategy over brute force marked her as potentially weak in the eyes of her instructors. He lived through her first real battle against raiders from the Shkari Remnant, felt her terror and exhilaration as she proved herself in actual combat. He experienced her promotion to the ranks of the First Blades, the ceremony where she first donned the bonding plate armor, and the isolation that came with such elevated status. Most powerfully, he felt her deep, secret fear that she was unworthy of her position, that her youth and unorthodox approach to warfare made her a liability to the warrior tradition she had sworn to uphold. This doubt had driven her to take assignments that more experienced blades might have declined, always pushing herself to prove that the Council's faith in her was justified. As their memories intertwined, Marcus began to see the profound parallels in their experiences. Both had been marked as different from an early age, both had struggled to find their place in societies that valued different qualities than those they naturally possessed, and both had found meaning in service to something larger than themselves. But the ritual wasn't finished. The memories began to accelerate, showing possible futures rather than established past. Marcus saw himself transformed by the bonding process, his human form enhanced and modified until he could stand as an equal among the greatest warriors of the galaxy. He saw diplomatic meetings where his unique perspective bridged gaps between species that had been enemies for centuries. He saw battles where he and Cathara fought as a perfectly synchronized team, their bond allowing them to anticipate each other's actions with supernatural precision. But he also saw darker possibilities. Futures where the transformation went wrong, where he became a monster that retained his human consciousness but was driven mad by alien instincts he couldn't control. He saw the bond becoming parasitic, slowly consuming his individuality until nothing remained but an extension of Cathara's will. He saw wars started by those who feared what he represented, conflicts that cost millions of lives across dozens of worlds. Through it all, Elder Morthak's presence loomed like a watchful judge, examining every reaction and cataloging every response. The ancient Valorian was not just observing the ritual, but actively shaping it, choosing which visions to emphasize and which fears to explore most deeply. Finally, the visions began to slow, focusing on a single, crucial moment. Marcus found himself standing in what appeared to be a vast library, its shelves stretching impossibly high and filled with books written in scripts from across the galaxy. Cathara stood beside him, her hand in his, and together they faced a figure that radiated such profound wisdom and age that looking directly at it was almost impossible. "The choice is before you," the figure said, in a voice like the whisper of cosmic wind. "The bond can be severed now, returning you both to your original paths with no lasting harm. Or it can be allowed to develop, transforming you both into something unprecedented, but know that this transformation cannot be undone. You will become bridges between worlds, carrying the hopes and fears of entire species. Are you prepared for such responsibility?" Marcus looked at Cathara, seeing her as she truly was for the first time. Not an alien warrior who represented everything he could never be, but someone whose deepest fears and highest aspirations mirrored his own. Through the bond, he felt her answering the same question, making the same impossible choice. "Yes," they said together, and the library dissolved around them. Marcus opened his eyes to find himself back in the temple chamber, still kneeling on the crystal platform with his hands on the resonance points. His entire body ached as if he had been running for hours, and his clothes were soaked with sweat. Beside him, Cathara was breathing heavily, her tattoos still glowing with residual energy from the ritual. Elder Morthak stood before them, his ancient face unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound in the chamber was their labored breathing and the soft hum of the crystal walls. "Interesting," the elder said finally. "Interesting?" Marcus managed to croak. "In 3,000 years of existence, I have never seen a bonding develop so quickly or completely," Elder Morthak explained. "Most candidates require weeks of preparation before they can achieve the level of synchronization you displayed within minutes of beginning the ritual. Either you are both naturally suited for this process, or the universe has conspired to create perfect conditions for your union." "So we passed?" Cathara asked. "You have passed the first test," Elder Morthak corrected. "The cleansing ritual has revealed that you are both capable of maintaining your individual consciousness while sharing thoughts and emotions. This is essential, as a bond that consumes one or both participants is worse than no bond at all." Marcus felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the elder's next words. "However, the true test lies ahead. You must now prove that your bond can withstand external pressure and serve purposes beyond your own desires. Tomorrow you will face the trial of unity, where you will be tested as a team against challenges specifically designed to exploit the weaknesses that the cleansing ritual has revealed." "What kind of challenges?" Marcus asked. "Combat scenarios, diplomatic crises, moral dilemmas," Elder Morthak listed matter-of-factly. "You will be forced to make decisions that could result in the death of innocents, the collapse of alliances, or the destruction of sacred traditions. Your bond will be tested by fear, by doubt, by the temptation to sacrifice one partner to save the other." Cathara stood slowly, helping Marcus to his feet. Through their connection, he could feel her determination burning like a star, warming his own resolve. "We're ready," she said firmly. Elder Morthak's silver eyes studied them both for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. "Perhaps you are," he said finally. "But remember this. The galaxy is watching. If you succeed, you will become symbols of cooperation between species. If you fail, you will become cautionary tales about the dangers of reaching too far beyond one's natural limitations." As they left the temple chamber, Marcus felt the weight of impossible expectation settling on his shoulders. But he also felt something else, a growing certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Cathara would face them together. The bond between them was no longer an accident or an unwanted burden. It was a choice they had made freely, with full knowledge of the consequences. The trial ahead would determine not just their own fates, but the future of human-Valorian relations and possibly the balance of power in their entire region of the galaxy. No pressure at all. The trial chamber aboard the Eternal Harmony defied every law of physics that Marcus thought he understood. The space seemed to shift and flow around them, sometimes appearing to be a simple room with metallic walls, other times expanding into vast environments that stretched beyond the horizon. Advanced holographic technology combined with artificial gravity manipulation and psychic interfaces to create scenarios so realistic that Marcus's enhanced senses through the bond could barely distinguish them from actual reality. "The first trial is combat synchronization," Elder Morthak announced, his voice echoing from speakers embedded throughout the chamber. "You will face opponents designed to exploit the weaknesses revealed during your cleansing ritual. Remember, this is not about individual prowess, but about your ability to function as a unified entity. The chamber around them shifted, becoming a rugged mountainous landscape under an alien sky. The gravity felt heavier than Earth normal but lighter than the Valorian homeworld, creating an environment that favored neither species. In the distance, Marcus could see structures that looked like a cross between military installations and ancient temples, with multiple defensive positions and clear tactical advantages for anyone who controlled the high ground. Kethara stood beside him, once again wearing her ceremonial armor, though Marcus noticed that it had changed since their bonding. The purple metal now contained streaks of blue that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his own heartbeat, and the engravings had become more complex, incorporating designs that looked almost human in their geometric patterns. "You're armed this time," she said, gesturing to the weapon that had appeared at his side. Marcus looked down to find himself wearing armor similar to Kethara's, but scaled for human proportions. A sword hung at his hip, its blade made from the same color-shifting metal as their armor. When he drew it, the weapon felt perfectly balanced in his hand, as if it had been crafted specifically for his grip and fighting style. "I don't know how to use a sword," Marcus protested. "The bond will guide you," Kethara replied. "Trust in our connection and let my experience become yours." As if summoned by her words, knowledge flowed through the psychic link between them. Centuries of sword training, tactical awareness, and combat instincts became available to Marcus's conscious mind. It was disorienting, like suddenly having access to memories that weren't his own, but gradually he began to sort through the information and adapt it to his human physiology and reflexes. Their opponents appeared without warning, a squad of figures that looked like Valorians but moved with mechanical precision that marked them as sophisticated androids. They were armed with energy weapons and moved in perfect coordination, immediately taking positions that would allow them to concentrate their fire while minimizing their exposure to return attacks. "They're using standard Valorian military tactics," Kethara observed, drawing her own blade. "Defensive positioning, overlapping fields of fire, methodical advancement." Marcus felt his enhanced tactical awareness kicking in, fed by Kethara's knowledge but filtered through his own analytical approach to problem-solving. "Then we don't fight like Valorians, we fight like a human would, unpredictably." Through the bond he felt Kethara's approval and amusement. "Show me." Instead of charging forward in the direct assault that Valorian honor would demand, Marcus began to move laterally, using the rocky terrain for cover while studying the android's movement patterns. Through their connection, he shared his observations with Kethara, who immediately understood his strategy. "They're programmed to respond to honorable combat," she realized. "They expect us to announce our presence and engage in formal battle." "Exactly, so we don't do that." Marcus found a position where loose rocks were balanced precariously on a slope above the android formation. Using techniques that were more engineering than warfare, he began to destabilize the geological formation while Kethara created a distraction by making herself visible to the enemy forces. The androids immediately focused their fire on her, allowing Marcus to trigger a controlled landslide that scattered their formation and damaged several of their weapons. But instead of pressing their advantage, he signaled Kethara to withdraw again. "We're not trying to win quickly," he explained through their mental link. "We're trying to learn how they adapt to unconventional tactics." For the next 20 minutes, they conducted what amounted to a mobile experiment in asymmetric warfare. Marcus would identify weaknesses in the environment or in the android's programming. Kethara would execute precisely timed attacks that exploited those weaknesses, and then they would withdraw before the enemy could mount an effective counterattack. By the end of the engagement, they had eliminated all of their opponents without suffering a single injury, using a combination of tactical innovation and perfect coordination that neither could have achieved alone. "Impressive," Elder Morthak's voice echoed across the now empty landscape. "You've demonstrated that your bond enhances rather than constrains your individual capabilities. The second trial will test your moral synchronization." The environment shifted around them, becoming a bustling spaceport filled with beings from dozens of different species. The air was thick with the sounds of different languages and the smell of exotic foods and alien technologies. It was a place of commerce and cultural exchange, the kind of neutral ground where different civilizations met to trade knowledge and resources. "You are diplomatic observers," Elder Morthak explained. "A terrorist organization has planted a weapon of mass destruction somewhere in this facility. You have limited time to find and disarm it, but doing so will require making choices that violate the moral codes of both your species." Almost immediately, Marcus and Kethara began receiving information through hidden earpieces. They learned that the weapon could kill thousands of innocent beings, but the only way to locate it was to torture information out of captured terrorists who had so far refused to cooperate. Alternatively, they could evacuate the facility, but doing so would destroy the carefully negotiated peace talks between three warring species that were taking place in the station's diplomatic section. "This is designed to pit human ethics against Valorian honor codes," Cathara observed quietly as they made their way through the crowded corridors. "Humans believe that torture is always wrong, regardless of the potential benefits," Marcus replied. "But Valorians believe that sometimes individual suffering is necessary to prevent greater harm to society. Through their bond, they could feel each other's moral convictions, and for the first time since the process began, they encountered a fundamental disagreement between their worldviews. The tension created a painful dissonance in their psychic connection, like two musical notes that were almost but not quite in harmony. "We have to find a third option," Marcus said, fighting through the mental static that their disagreement was creating. "What third option?" "The scenario is designed to force a binary choice between two unacceptable alternatives." Marcus stopped walking and closed his eyes, letting his engineering-trained mind work through the problem while drawing on Cathara's tactical knowledge through their bond. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the real test isn't how we resolve the dilemma, but whether we can maintain our connection despite holding different moral positions. He felt Cathara's understanding bloom through their link as she grasped his insight. The bond isn't supposed to make us identical. It's supposed to make us stronger by preserving our differences while allowing us to work together. They spent the next hour pursuing their investigation using methods that honored both their ethical frameworks. Marcus focused on technical solutions, analyzing the station's infrastructure to identify likely hiding places for the weapon, while Cathara used her understanding of military tactics to predict where terrorists would position such a device for maximum effect. Rather than choosing between torture and evacuation, they found ways to gather information through careful observation and logical deduction. When they finally located the weapon, they discovered that it was a test device that was never intended to actually detonate. "You have learned the most important lesson of the bond," Elder Morthak said as the simulation dissolved around them. "Unity does not require uniformity. Your different perspectives and moral frameworks make you stronger, not weaker, as long as you can maintain respect for each other's convictions." The third trial tested their ability to maintain their individual identities while sharing thoughts and emotions at an unprecedented level. They were placed in a sensory deprivation chamber, where the only input was their psychic connection to each other. For hours they had to resist the temptation to simply merge their consciousness completely, instead learning to maintain the delicate balance between sharing and independence. The fourth trial was perhaps the most difficult. They were presented with a scenario where saving one of their species required sacrificing the other. Working through holographic projections, they witnessed the destruction of Earth and Valthresh Prime, with the ability to prevent one catastrophe but not both. The emotional weight of the decision created such stress on their bond that Marcus felt his human psyche begin to crack under the pressure. But it was Cathara who found the solution, recognizing that the scenario was designed to test whether they could think beyond the limitations of species loyalty. Instead of choosing between Earth and Valthresh Prime, they identified the common enemy that was threatening both worlds and developed a strategy to neutralize that threat instead. The final trial was the most complex yet, a multi-layered diplomatic crisis where they had to negotiate between 7 different species, each with competing interests and cultural blind spots that made communication nearly impossible. Using their bond's ability to facilitate understanding between different forms of consciousness, Marcus and Cathara spent 6 hours crafting agreements that satisfied everyone's core needs while avoiding the trigger points that would have led to war. When the last trial ended, Marcus and Cathara found themselves back in the simple chamber where they had started, exhausted but triumphant. The trials had pushed their bond to its limits and beyond, forcing them to develop new ways of thinking and working together that neither of their species had ever achieved. Elder Morthak materialized in the chamber, his ancient form seeming somehow less intimidating than before. The silver eyes that had judged them so harshly now held something that might have been approval. "You have exceeded all expectations," he said simply. "The bond between you has developed into something unprecedented in our historical records. You have proven that conscious cooperation between species can create capabilities that neither could achieve alone."
Marcus felt relief wash over him, followed immediately by curiosity.
"So what happens now? Do we go back to our regular duties? Do we become some kind of diplomatic team?" Now, Elder Morthak said with what might have been a smile. "You face your greatest challenge yet. The Galactic Council has been monitoring these trials, and your success has attracted attention from species across known space. There are those who see your bond as a threat to the existing balance of power, and others who believe it represents the future of interspecies cooperation." Cathara straightened to attention. "What kind of attention?" "The kind that could lead to war," Elder Morthak replied gravely. 3 different species have already filed formal protests with the Council, claiming that human-Valorian bonding represents a violation of the Genetic Purity Accords. Meanwhile, 2 others have requested immediate diplomatic meetings to explore the possibility of similar programs with their own populations. Marcus felt the implications hitting him like a physical blow. So we've gone from being an unprecedented anomaly to being a potential cause of galactic conflict. Politics is rarely simple, Elder Morthak agreed, but you have proven that you can handle challenges far beyond those that any individual being could face alone. The Council has requested that you represent both humanity and the Valorian Empire in the upcoming hearings. Both of us? Together? As a single entity, the Elder confirmed. You will be the first bonded pair to address the Galactic Council as unified advocates for your respective peoples. The decisions made in those hearings will determine not just your own fate, but the future of cooperative evolution between species. Through their bond, Marcus felt Cathara's excitement and determination merging with his own nervous energy. They had passed every test set before them, but now they faced a challenge that could reshape galactic civilization itself. When do we leave for the council chambers? Cathara asked. Tomorrow, Elder Morthak replied. And remember, the galaxy will be watching. You carry the hopes of every being who believes that cooperation is stronger than conflict, and the fears of every being who believes that some boundaries should never be crossed. Do not underestimate the weight of what you represent. As they left the trial chamber, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few days. From a maintenance worker worried about fixing air recyclers to a galactic diplomat whose decisions could affect billions of lives, the responsibility was overwhelming, but through the bond he could feel Cathara's unwavering confidence in their ability to meet any challenge together. The universe had chosen them for reasons they were only beginning to understand. Tomorrow they would find out if they could live up to that choice. The Galactic Council chamber was a marvel of engineering that existed in a pocket dimension suspended between 7 different star systems. Representatives from over 200 species gathered in the massive amphitheater, which adjusted its gravity, atmosphere, and environmental conditions for each delegate's section automatically. The scale was so vast that Marcus needed the enhanced perceptions granted by his bond with Cathara, just to process the sight of so many different forms of consciousness gathered in one place. They stood together at the center of the chamber on the speaker's dais, a platform that rotated slowly to ensure all delegates could observe them clearly. Marcus wore formal diplomatic attire that had been specially created for this occasion, a suit that incorporated both human tailoring and Valorian ceremonial elements, with fabric that shifted color to reflect his emotional state through the bond. Cathara wore matching formal armor, her bonding plate polished to mirror brilliance and covered with new engravings that told the story of their trials. The chair recognizes the bonded representatives of humanity and the Valorian Empire, announced Coordinator Zephin, a crystalline being whose body rang like a bell when she spoke. You may present your case to the council. Marcus felt the weight of countless alien eyes upon them, some curious, some hostile, some filled with a hope that he was afraid they might not be able to fulfill. Through the bond, he drew strength from Cathara's presence, letting her centuries of military discipline steady his nerves. Honor delegates, Marcus began, his voice amplified throughout the chamber by translation systems that rendered his words into hundreds of different languages simultaneously. We stand before you today not as representatives of just 2 species, but as proof that the barriers between our peoples need not be permanent or insurmountable. The human speaks of barriers as if they were arbitrary constructions, interrupted Ambassador Veltus of the hegemony of pure thought, her mental voice projecting directly into every consciousness in the chamber. But these barriers exist for good reason. The mixing of species consciousness leads to contamination, degradation, and eventual extinction of the pure forms that took millions of years to evolve. Murmurs of agreement rippled through several sections of the chamber, particularly from the delegates representing the older, more established civilizations. These were species that had achieved galactic prominence through isolation and careful preservation of their genetic and cultural heritage. Cathara stepped forward, her 4 silver eyes scanning the assembled delegates with tactical precision. Ambassador Velthus speaks of purity as if it were strength, she replied, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that all Valoronians used in formal speech. But my people have learned through millennia of warfare that diversity is the greatest weapon against stagnation and defeat. Our enemies have consistently been those who refused to adapt, who clung to pure forms until they became brittle and broke under pressure. The Valorian warrior speaks of war, countered Delegate Morhex from the Eternal Republic, his mechanically enhanced voice grinding through the translation systems. But war is chaos, destruction, the antithesis of ordered civilization. The bonding protocol represents a return to the barbaric practices of our primitive ancestors, when species boundaries were fluid and consciousness was uncontrolled. Marcus felt frustration building through the bond, but also Cathara's tactical assessment of the chamber's political dynamics. Nearly 40% of the delegates represented species that had achieved advancement through strict genetic control and cultural isolation. Another 30% came from younger civilizations that were still establishing their identity and feared being absorbed by more dominant species. Only the remaining 30% came from species that had experience with successful interspecies cooperation. "If I may address Delegate Mort Hex's concerns," Marcus said, stepping forward with his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture of respect that he had learned from studying diplomatic protocols. "The bonding protocol is not about losing identity or returning to primitive chaos. It is about conscious, voluntary evolution that preserves the best aspects of each participant while creating new capabilities that benefit everyone." He gestured, and the chamber's display systems activated to show recordings from their trials aboard the Eternal Harmony. The assembled delegates watched as Marcus and Cathara demonstrated their enhanced problem-solving abilities, their capacity for rapid communication and coordination, and their ability to understand and mediate between different forms of consciousness. "What you see here is not the destruction of human or Valorian identity," Marcus continued. "My thoughts are still my own. My values remain unchanged. My connection to my species is stronger than ever. But now I also have access to perspectives and abilities that allow me to serve both our peoples more effectively." "Pretty words," scoffed Representative Thrax of the Militant Coalition, whose bear-like form was covered in ceremonial scars, "but show us proof. Show us that this bond of yours can accomplish something that neither species could achieve alone." Marcus exchanged a look with Cathara, and through their mental connection they shared a moment of perfect understanding. They had anticipated this challenge and prepared for it. "Very well," Cathara said. "Coordinator Zephin, we request permission to demonstrate our capabilities using the Council's emergency arbitration protocols." A ripple of surprise passed through the chamber. The emergency arbitration protocols were used only for conflicts that threatened galactic stability, disputes so complex or contentious that they had defied resolution through normal diplomatic channels. "That is, highly irregular," Coordinator Zephin replied, her crystalline form chiming with uncertainty. "The current emergency arbitration involves the Tri-Star conflict, which has been deadlocked for over 2 standard years, 3 star systems, 7 species, and trade routes that affect over 50 billion beings. Do you truly believe your bond grants you the ability to resolve such a complex situation?" "We believe it grants us the ability to try," Marcus replied simply. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates conferred with their advisors and consulted their records. The Tri-Star conflict was legendary for its complexity, a web of competing territorial claims, resource rights, religious significance, and cultural taboos that had created a diplomatic knot so tangled that some experts believed it could only be resolved through warfare. After several minutes of debate, Coordinator Zephin called for order. "The Council will permit this demonstration, but with strict conditions. You will have 1 standard hour to review the case materials, followed by 1 hour to present your proposed resolution. If your solution is accepted by all parties to the conflict, it will be formally adopted. If it fails, the Council will consider this evidence that the bonding protocol creates false confidence rather than genuine capability." "Understood," Marcus and Cathara said in unison. They were provided with access to a private chamber where they could review thousands of pages of diplomatic records, territorial surveys, religious texts, and cultural analyses. Using their enhanced mental connection, they were able to process information at a rate that would have been impossible for either of them alone. Marcus brought his engineering-trained analytical approach to identifying the core structural problems, while Cathara contributed her tactical expertise in recognizing patterns in strategic relationships. "The religious component is the key," Cathara observed after 40 minutes of intense study. "All 3 star systems contain sites that are sacred to different species, but the conflicts aren't really about theology. They're about economic control disguised as spiritual necessity." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "The Zolani claim they need exclusive access to the eternal fountains for their pilgrimage rituals, but the real issue is that their homeworld's water supplies are contaminated, and the fountains represent their only source of pure water. The Koresh insists that the crystal caverns must remain untouched to preserve their ancestors' spirits, but actually they're trying to prevent anyone from discovering that the caverns contain the largest known deposits of rare earth minerals in this sector. And the humans of Proxima Colony claim that the orbital stations are historically significant because they represent humanity's first deep space settlements, but really they're trying to maintain control over the hyperspace jump points that make interstellar trade possible in this region." Through their bond, Marcus and Cathara began to develop a solution that addressed the real needs behind each species' stated positions. Rather than trying to resolve the territorial disputes directly, they focused on creating agreements that would provide each species with what they actually needed, while removing the incentives for continued conflict. When they returned to the council chamber, they presented their solution with the confidence of beings who had learned to think beyond the limitations of single-species perspective. The Tri-Star conflict cannot be resolved through traditional territorial negotiations because the stated claims mask the real issues, Marcus began. Each species is fighting to preserve something essential to their survival, but they are using methods that guarantee conflict rather than cooperation. Cathara activated the chamber's display systems to show their proposed solution. We propose the creation of a Tri-Star cooperative authority governed jointly by all three species but administered by a neutral fourth party. Isolani will receive guaranteed access to purified water through orbital processing stations that can clean their homeworld's contaminated supplies. The Koresh will maintain spiritual sovereignty over the crystal caverns while partnering with galactic mining consortiums to extract minerals without disturbing the sites they consider sacred. The human colonists will gain economic benefits from managing the hyperspace trade routes while surrendering exclusive political control. Each species gets what they actually need, Marcus continued, while contributing to a cooperative framework that benefits everyone. The Zolani gain water security, the Koresh gain mining revenues, and the humans gain trade profits. Most importantly, the cooperation required to make this system work will create bonds between the species that make future conflicts less likely. The chamber was silent as the delegates processed the proposal. Marcus could feel skepticism and hope warring in the assembled consciousness, could sense the political calculations taking place as representatives considered how this resolution would affect their own species' interests. The proposal has merit, admitted Representative Karash of the Koresh delegation, his translated voice carrying harmonics of surprise, but it requires a level of trust between our species that has never existed. The cooperative authority would be overseen by a joint council with representatives from all three species, plus neutral observers from the Galactic Trade Commission. No single species could dominate the others, and all parties would benefit from the system's success. This is all theoretical, objected Ambassador Threx of Proxima Colony. How do we know this cooperation would actually work? Marcus smiled, feeling Cathara's approval through their bond. Because we are living proof that it works. Our species were barely allies 6 months ago. Valorians saw humans as a minor client species, useful for certain technical tasks but not worthy of true partnership. Humans saw Valorians as intimidating protectors who tolerated our presence but would never accept us as equals. And now? Asked Coordinator Zephin. Now we are something neither species could have become alone, Cathar answered. We retain our individual identities and values, but we have gained capabilities that serve both our peoples. The same principle can work on a larger scale, between multiple species, if we have the courage to try. The debate that followed lasted for hours, with delegates raising objections, proposing modifications, and testing the limits of the proposed agreement. But gradually, Marcus began to sense a shift in the chamber's mood. The Tri-Star conflict had seemed unsolvable for so long that even a potentially flawed solution was more attractive than continued deadlock. When the final vote was called, the Tri-Star Cooperative Authority was approved by a margin that surprised even its supporters. More importantly, the success of the demonstration led to a formal endorsement of the bonding protocol by the Galactic Council, with provisions for careful monitoring and voluntary participation. As they left the council chamber, Marcus felt the weight of history settling around them. They'd achieved something unprecedented, not just for their own species, but for galactic civilization as a whole. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be critics, setbacks, and challenges that they couldn't yet imagine. But they had proven that cooperation between species could create capabilities that neither could achieve alone. So what happens now? Marcus asked as they walked through the corridors of the council station. Now we go home, Cathara replied, her mental voice warm with contentment and anticipation. We return to our duties aboard the Crimson Talon, but with new responsibilities. The council has authorized the establishment of a bonding research institute with facilities on both Earth and Valthresh Prime. We will be the first instructors, teaching others to achieve what we have learned. Marcus felt excitement building through their connection. So we're not the only ones anymore? If today's vote means what I think it means, we are the first of many. Other species have already expressed interest in developing similar programs. The Altarian Collective wants to explore the possibility of group consciousness bonding. The Silicon Empire believes they could create